We've come a long way in using Alibre PDM. In this video, let's cover metadata. This will help you manage information about your parts in ways that you may have not even thought possible. Let's get into it. Here in the Alibre PDM browser, we have the Do Nothing machine with a number of properties that we briefly talked through in previous videos. But let's talk about how to make the most of our properties in this video. First, I might open up a new part in Alibre Design. From here in our new part, I have the ability to go into the File menu, and I can edit things like the part number. I can make the description. I can make a comment about the version. And I can edit any of these core properties. And now, when I go to save this part, which I'll put it in the safe. How about with our gyroscope? Notice I did not check it in. When I go find this, here's my new part. I have all of my metadata filled out because I filled it out just in the part interface. When I go to edit this part, you'll notice that things are grayed out, and I can, even though I'm typing, I can't add values to these cells anymore. That's because our metadata is in the safe. So if I wish to modify these values, I can click here to open Safe Metadata Card. And from here, I can edit and add information as needed. I'll say OK. And you'll notice that when I go back, my Save button is enabled. So whether I edit features on the part or edit the metadata, saving the part is the same with the new changes. And I'll check it into the safe. So we should be familiar with how to edit all of the properties that we were given here in the Properties section of the PDM browser. But let's talk about adding our own custom properties. Well, let's go up here to this chart looking icon, and we'll go with Manage Properties over here. And these are the built-in properties that we have in Alibre, and we can add new custom properties, which I would like to do now. I'll click on New Custom Property, and we are asked where do we want to have the data in the property from. We can have pick from data that is predetermined, or we can have the user input the values that they want. For now, I'll go with the user inputting the values that they want. I can give my property a name, and then I can select a type, and there are several types to choose from: text, multi-line text, date, integer, and real. I'll go with real. And now let's take a look at what I have created. For my display stand, I can choose Add Property here, and a new property shows up. And I can choose from the drop-down list what property I'd like to add, and of course I'm going to choose my new property that I just created. So we're going to see a few things here. First, we have different types. We have this little A right here, which is text. This allows me to put in characters as a string of text, and then hit the green check, and there's my text. We have a description, which is multi-line. This allows us to add multiple lines of text. And then I can say OK. Obviously, only the first line shows up here, but if I hover my mouse, then I can see the full text as needed. So this A right here signifies a string of text. This multi-line signifies strings of text that can go through multiple lines. Then we have a star, which is a custom property that we'll be getting into later in the video. Then we have a date. And a date allows us to select a particular date from a drop-down box. Then we have a real. A real allows me to enter a real number like 5.5568, right? And when I add that, of course, it records that as a number. I can also enter a whole value if I'd like. This is for numbers. The other kind of property that I can use is an integer. I'll define a new custom property, and of course I'll go with user input. And after giving it a name, I'll select integer from here. And the difference between real and integer is, of course, integer only accepts integers. So as I add an integer property, if I try to enter something like 5.5, which is not an integer, then it says, please retry, enter a whole number value. So I can only enter whole numbers here, but with real, I can choose decimals as well. You also notice when I add properties, I have a red X over here. When I add my own custom properties, I have the option to delete them since they're not part of the initial properties that we are given. And then I'll click on the green check to confirm my change. That is how we might make our own custom properties. For a more realistic example, I can create a property known as contract number. If we'd like to trace what contracts we have, we can allow the user to input that, and I'll choose text. And there's our contract number, and we can give this a number. Maybe I'll give this a more realistic number there. But perhaps we wish to have more complex data selection than we do by just adding a property and having a single value. For that, let's take a closer look at custom properties. I'll again go into my metadata setup, and this time I'll choose Manage Classes. And we might ask, what is a class? A class is a collection of properties at its heart. So we put some properties together in a group and we'll have a class. I'll manage classes here, and then I'll create a new custom class. From here, I'll give the class a name, and we'll want to call this, how about manufacturing facility? And I will click on Data, and I'll populate a few instances using this plus button. And I can list here manufacturing facilities that I'm concerned with. Perhaps I'll add Flagstaff, Arizona. And I can navigate to the next cell by using the Tab key. Once I have a few manufacturing facilities listed, I can select OK. And a class is created that has those facilities. From here, I can make a property. Now, when we choose data source, since we're going to be using the class that we've created, we can choose Pick from Data. And for our data type, we can choose the class that we just created, which is manufacturing facility. I'll leave these values unchecked for now, and I'll give this property a name. I'll call it manufacturing locations. Now, when I go to my, say, do nothing machine, I can add a property of manufacturing locations. And now I'm given a drop-down list that I can select from whatever the criteria that I put in previously is. Perhaps this is made in good old Holbert. I'll select the green check. Now, while we made this property, we didn't focus on selecting values on the fly or allowing multi-select. What might that look like? Well, let's say that our knob here on our do nothing machine is made of wood. I'll make a class for manufacturing processes. We'll come over here to Manage Classes, create a new custom class, and I'll call this Wood Manufacturing. I'll create data. And we'll say instance 1 will be CNC. Okay. With that being done, I'll select the OK button. And there we have a class for wood manufacturing. I'll create a property for it that will contain that class. Our custom property here will be from the existing data, since we're pulling from a class, and we'll call this wood processing, as it will contain all of our wood processes that we can manufacture with. I'll select wood manufacturing as a class. This time I'll allow values on the fly and multi-select. Now I'll navigate back to my do nothing machine and add my property. Scrolling to the bottom, I have wood processing, and I'll see that this knob must have been turned on a lathe. It must have had a hole drilled through it as well. So because I allowed multi-select, I can now select more than one of these options. I can say it was both turned and drilled. And I'll select OK. But perhaps there's something else. Maybe it was laminated or something like that. Well, I can open up my part, and I have this Add New option. And this is where we allow values on the fly. When we allow values on the fly, we get an Add New option. And when I select it, I can add a new name. In this case, I'll add wood lamination. And I'll say OK. And now, wood lamination is added to our list. If I navigate back to my class, and I look at my wood manufacturing class that I made, under the Data tab, wood lamination has been added just as though I had clicked this plus and added wood lamination from this menu. So that is how we allow values on the fly. The user can add whichever value they would like. So far, we've been able to add some classes that contain a list of options, but we can add even more complexity to this. Perhaps we would like to paint our do-nothing machine. Let's make some classes that define the paint that will be used on our do-nothing machine. We'll want to specify how much of each pigment, what kind of finish to have, and a list of existing colors with those properties. I'll go to Setup again, and I'll add some properties. I'll make a property that will be user input, and I'll make it red pigment. As a type, I'll choose integer. Next, from a new custom property, I'll do the same thing. User input, we'll make this blue pigment, and integer. Lastly, I'll choose green pigment, actually yellow, so I can work with my primary colors, and we'll make that an integer as well. So if I mix all of my primary colors, I should be able to make any color I need. Black might be handy as well. But now we'll want to cover our paint finishes, so let's make a class for that. I'll make a new custom class, and I can choose to make properties for every possible paint finish, but I think a class will tie these things together quite nicely, as we'll demonstrate. I'll go to Data and make a few options for finishes. My first option, let's go with flat, glossy, let's do semi-gloss, and satin. We'll say OK to that. Oh, but I better give it a class name as well. Now with my paint finishes class being made, I'll make a corresponding property to contain this. I'll go with Manage Properties, New Custom Property, and we'll say Pick from Data, the class that we just made. We'll say Paint Finish Types. Under Custom Data Type, I'll go with Paint Finishes there. I'll not select either of these boxes and say OK. Now I have everything I need to make my final class. Let's make that class and see what it might look like. I'll head back to Manage Classes and make a new custom class. We'll call this Paint Color Definition. Now I can select the elements that I need to add to my default properties. I'll add my blue pigment using the left arrow, and then I can choose my red and yellow pigments as well. And then I can choose my custom property paint finish types. If I wish to reorder things as a matter of preference, I can use these up arrows to change the order. Now I can go to the Data tab, and when I add in an instance, I can see that my properties are imported here. So I'll add a few instances. And if I wish to remove one, I can always click on this X to remove an instance. I'll add in certain colors, including yellow flat, orange glossy, and purple flat. Now when I select yellow flat, I can assign values to my properties. My paint finish type can be flat, and I can assign values to my pigments. For yellow, maybe I'll make my blue be a value of 0, my red a value of 0, and my yellow I'll make a value of 100. Next I can choose orange glossy, and you'll note that if I click back on yellow flat, my values I've entered are retained. And for orange, I'll perhaps go with a glossy finish type, maybe a blue value of 10, a red value of 200, and a yellow value of 175. And then for purple, I can choose a flat type. My blue pigment, maybe I'll say 320, my red pigment, I'll say 302, and my yellow, I'll say 56 or 26. And then, with these values entered, I can say OK. And now that I have my paint color definition, I can navigate back and I can make a property to express the class that I've just made. I'll call this Paint Selection. Of course, under Data Source, I'll pick from Data, which is the class that I've just made, and I can choose the class from here. And there it is, Paint Color Definition, and I'll allow values on the fly. I'll navigate back to my Do Nothing machine, and perhaps I'll make the base have a paint color selection property. I'll say Paint Selection here, and there are my values. Perhaps I'll choose Orange Glossy, and then if anyone wonders what Orange Glossy is or how to make it, I can select this question mark, and it comes up with the paint finish and the amounts of pigment in order to make that paint. I also can select Add New, and I can add my own paint color from here. Perhaps I'd like to have a satin finish, and I'll have blue for this color be 175. I'll have red be 350, and yellow be 265. And I can describe this color as something like an earthy brown or an olive. And I'll say OK. So now I have the option of earthy brown if I'd want my users to add their own values. I'll click on the green check. So here we are able to navigate through much of our metadata, should we need to, but displaying it is handy also. Here I have my grid that displays many important parts of my safe, and I can have my properties be displayed up here as well. I can right-click on a column, and I can say Add Property Column. Perhaps I care about the manufacturing plant that this was made. Well, I can choose from my list of properties, manufacturing locations, and sure enough, I have a column here that lists manufacturing locations. I can reorder this column as needed, and as well as resize it. Then I can set every part to a manufacturing location as needed. This is especially handy if I'd like to just sort by the manufacturing location and see all the parts that are made where. So far, we've talked about working with parts and assemblies and their metadata, but it's also worth talking about we can do metadata on folders. If I choose my parts folder, I can click on Add a Property, and my previous properties that I've made are available to apply to the folder. So I might care, say, about the approval date related to the folder. I can click a green check and add the engineering approval date, and so on. So what we've done with the parts can apply to the folders. We've been able to nest classes into properties and so on to be able to make detailed information about our parts using metadata. Hopefully, this was very helpful and will enhance your experience using the Alibre PDM browser. And that's how you can use metadata to help with the information surrounding your parts. Thank you for watching.